The fall of a general, stripped of command. The battlefield had always been Khalid bin Walid's true home. He had crushed the mighty Persian Empire, humbled the Byzantines, and shattered enemy formations with the precision of a master strategist. No man had ever faced him in combat and lived to tell the tale. He was Saiful, the sword of Allah, sharpened for the cause of Islam. But today, the blow he faced did not come from an enemy's sword. A messenger arrived, his face pale, his hands shaking as he held out a sealed decree from the Caliph himself. Khalid, R.A., took the parchment and broke the seal, his calloused fingers running over the words of Caliph Umar, "I remove you from command of the Muslim army." Silence fell over the war camp. Soldiers exchanged stunned glances, their hands tightening around their weapons as if bracing for an unseen attack. They had followed Khalid, R.A., through deserts and mountains, trusting his leadership more than their own instincts. One of his most loyal commanders, Abu Ubaidah, R.A., who had been assigned as his replacement, stepped forward, his expression pained. "Khalid, this is not my doing," he said quietly. "I do not question your leadership, nor do the men. The Caliph has his reasons." Khalid Ara exhaled sharply. He was not a man who questioned orders. Obedience was woven into his soul. But this was different. His voice was steady, but edged with something unspoken. "Have I failed?" Abu Ubaidah shook his head. "No, my brother. You have done nothing but bring victory after victory." Then why? The unspoken question burned in Khalid's mind. Was it jealousy? Politics? Had his reputation grown too mighty? He thought of Caliph Umar, R.A., a man of unshakable justice, never one to favor anyone, no matter how great. Could this be a test? The warriors of the army looked to him for a reaction. A lesser man might have rebelled, might have turned his loyal followers against the order. But Khalid, R.A., would never fight his own people. He was a sword, and the sword did not decide when to strike. Allah did. Slowly he removed his armor, the weight of steel replaced by the heavier burden of uncertainty. He looked over his men one last time. Then, with a quiet dignity, he handed his sword to Abu Ubaidah. "A commander is nothing but a servant of Allah," he said. "If he wills me to lay down my sword, then so be it." That night, as he departed from the war camp toward Homs, Khalid rode in silence. The stars above shone indifferently upon him, the same stars that had once witnessed his triumphs. But in his heart, a battle raged. Had Allah truly intended for him to be cast aside? Or was this only the beginning of a greater test, one unlike any he had ever faced before? Restless in exile, a warrior without war. The streets of Homs were alive with merchants, travelers, and soldiers. Yet in the heart of the city, where the echoes of battle had once filled the air, Khalid bin Walid sat in quiet frustration. The great general who had led armies across empires, who had shattered foes with a mere glance, was now a man with no war to fight. Days turned into weeks. Khalid R.A. remained a revered figure, his presence alone enough to make enemies think twice before attacking the Muslim lands. The people of Homs respected him, and warriors still sought his wisdom. But despite their admiration, he was no longer the man he had been. Every morning, he awoke before dawn, training his body as if preparing for another campaign. He sparred with younger warriors, his strikes as deadly as ever. He strategized, drawing up battle plans against imaginary foes. But each time he turned to give orders, he was met with the same bitter truth. He was no longer their commander. The city's elders came to him one evening. "The people still see you as their leader, Saifullah," one of them said cautiously. "You must not let this wound fester in your heart." Khalid forced a smile. "A wound that cannot be seen is the slowest to heal." But then whispers began to spread. The Byzantines, humiliated after their defeats at his hands, were regrouping. Along the border, skirmishes increased. Messengers arrived with troubling reports. Roman forces had begun massing near the frontier. The people of Homs grew uneasy. Then came a fateful night. A rider, covered in dust and desperation, arrived at Khalid's doorstep. "The Byzantines gather in the hundreds," he gasped. "They plan to reclaim these lands, and our forces are too weak to stop them. The people are crying for you, Ya Saifullah! They need you to lead them once more." Khalid's fingers twitched over the hilt of his sword. His heart pounded. The fire of battle reignited in his veins. But a single thought stopped him. Would defying the Caliph's decree mean defying Allah? His men waited for his answer, hope flickering in their eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. A sword only moves when the wielder commands it, and I am no longer the hand that guides the army. Yet even as he uttered these words, doubt crept into his heart. Could he really sit by while war called his name? A choice lay before him. Remain in exile or take up his sword once more. Consequences be damned. But fate had already begun moving against him, and soon the decision would no longer be his to make. The shadow of death creeps closer. The nights in Homs grew colder, yet Khalid bin Walid R.A. burned from within. It began as an ache in his bones, a heaviness in his limbs that even the sharpest sword could not cut through. At first he dismissed it. A warrior's body carries wounds long after the battle has ended. But this was different. One evening, as he stood in the courtyard overseeing a group of young warriors sparring, a sudden weakness overtook him. His vision blurred, his breath came in ragged gasps, and before he could steady himself, his legs faltered beneath him. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. "Khalid!" His companions rushed forward, but he waved them off, forcing himself upright. "I am not defeated yet," he murmured, though his body screamed otherwise. But the illness did not retreat like a conquered enemy. It lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. Fever gripped him, sending him into restless dreams. Visions of past battles, of swords clashing, of dust rising beneath the hooves of war horses. In his delirium, he saw the faces of those he had slain and those he had fought beside. He heard their voices whispering to him from the battlefield. Was this how a warrior's end came? Not in combat, but in the slow, merciless grip of an unseen enemy. One evening, as he lay in his chamber, his body drenched in sweat, a shadow crossed his doorway. A visitor, a man stepped inside, cloaked in the garb of a traveler. But Khalid recognized him instantly. The sharp blue eyes, the scar running down his cheek. A Byzantine general, an enemy from another life. "You look weaker than when last we met, Saifullah," the man said in broken Arabic, a smirk playing on his lips, "and yet, even dying, you are feared." Studied him, his warrior's instincts flaring despite his weakened state. "Why are you here?" The Byzantine leaned in, his expression growing serious. "Because Rome has not forgotten its wounds, and now, without you leading them, your people will fall." A slow dread filled Khalid's chest. "The Byzantines are moving again," the man continued. "An army gathers at the border, preparing to reclaim what was lost." He hesitated, then added, "I came to see if the great Khalid bin Walid would rise one last time, or if death has finally defeated him." The words struck like a dagger. For the first time, Khalid questioned whether he would live long enough to see another battle. His body had carried him through war after war, but now it betrayed him. His time was running out. But Saifullah had never gone down without a fight. The call to battle? One last ride? The city of Homs trembled with whispers. The Byzantines were on the move, their forces amassing near the frontier. Scouts reported banners stretching across the horizon, the glint of steel visible under the morning sun. The enemy had waited for this moment. Khalid bin Walid was no longer in command, and the Muslims seemed vulnerable. But the people of Homs had not forgotten who lived among them. The streets filled with voices chanting a single name. "Ya Saifullah! Ya Saifullah!" Inside his chamber, Khalid sat upright, his fever momentarily forgotten. His heart pounded with something he had not felt in a long time, hope. A commander rushed in, breathless. "They are calling for you, Khalid. The people want you to lead them once more." A younger warrior, eyes burning with determination, knelt before him. "Give us the command, and we will ride with you to the ends of the earth." The fire of battle reignited in Khalid's chest. His trembling hands reached for the sword resting by his bedside. His fingers traced the hilt, the weapon that had never failed him. If he was to die, it should be with this sword in his hand upon the battlefield where he belonged. His companions brought his armor. With great effort, he pushed himself to his feet, feeling the weight of steel once more. The moment it touched his skin, he felt like himself again, the warrior, the general, the sword of Allah. He took a step forward, then another. But fate had other plans. His vision blurred, the strength drained from his body, and suddenly his knees buckled beneath him. His men barely caught him before he hit the ground. Panic rippled through the room. "Khalid!" He gritted his teeth, trying to rise. He had fought entire armies while wounded. He had battled through exhaustion, hunger, and bloodshed. But this weakness was unlike any enemy he had ever faced. One of his closest companions, tears brimming in his eyes, gripped his shoulder. "Ya Khalid, you must rest." "No," he growled, his voice strained. "This is my fight." But as the shouts of warriors echoed outside, as the city prepared for battle, Khalid finally understood his war was ending. For the first time in his life, the great general had been called to battle, and he would not be able to answer. A bitter realization gripped his soul. He was Saifullah, the sword of Allah, but what use was a sword that could no longer be lifted? Betrayal in the ranks. The fires of war were being lit across the land, but in the shadows of Homs, a more dangerous battle was unfolding, one that Khalid bin Walid never saw coming. As he lay weak in his chamber, his mind restless with the thought of war slipping through his fingers, a quiet conspiracy brewed among those he once called allies. That night, a lone figure slipped into the depths of the city. Cloaked and cautious, he arrived at a secret meeting place, a dimly lit chamber where whispers held more power than swords. He was met by a shadowy figure seated behind a thick veil of incense smoke. "Is it done?" the figure asked, his voice sharp as a blade. The cloaked man hesitated. Khalid bin Walid still breathes. The silence that followed was suffocating. "You were sent to ensure he would not rise again," the figure continued. "Do you know what will happen if he returns to battle? If he defies the Caliph's orders?" The cloaked man swallowed hard. The people revere him. They would follow him into battle, even against the Caliph's decree. The shadowed figure leaned forward. "Then we must make sure he never leads again." The plan had been in motion for months. Poison slowly administered, weakening him day by day. A betrayal so subtle that not even the great Saifullah had sensed it. But Khalid's will was stronger than they had expected. Even at the brink of death, he had tried to ride into battle. "Give it more time," the cloaked man insisted. "He is already fading. His own body is his prison." But the shadowed figure was not convinced. "We cannot take that risk," he murmured. "A warrior like Khalid does not simply fade away. If he still breathes by the next moon, we will finish it by another means." Meanwhile, in Khalid's chamber, Khalid sat awake, his body weak, but his mind sharp. He had sensed it for days. A change in the air, a weight pressing on his soul. There were whispers he wasn't meant to hear, glances exchanged when men thought he wasn't watching. He was a soldier. He knew when an attack was coming. And this time, the enemy was not on the battlefield. A trusted companion entered, carrying a cup of water. "Drink, my general. You must regain your strength." Khalid stared at the cup in the man's hands. His fingers itched to take it, but something held him back. Then he looked into his companion's eyes. For the first time, he saw it. Hesitation, guilt, a flicker of something off. A battle was brewing, but it was not one fought with swords. It was a war of loyalty and betrayal, and Khalid bin Walid would not fall so easily. A letter from Umar, a hidden truth revealed. Khalid bin Walid had faced countless enemies, but the betrayal within his own ranks stung deeper than any sword. His body, already weakened by illness, now bore the weight of suspicion. Had someone truly sought to end his life before its time? As he pondered this, an unexpected visitor arrived, a man he had not seen in years. Abu Darda, a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad and a trusted figure in the Muslim community, entered Khalid's chamber with a solemn expression. "I have something for you, Khalid," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. From within his robes, Abu Darda produced an old, sealed parchment, the wax unbroken, the script unmistakable. It was a letter from Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. Khalid's heart pounded. A letter from the Caliph? How long had this been hidden from him? With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. The words, written in Umar's unmistakable hand, burned into his soul. "O Khalid, know that your removal was never meant to dishonor you, nor was it a judgment upon your abilities. Your victories are known across the lands, but I feared that the people had begun to place their trust in you rather than in Allah. I wished for them to see that it is not the sword nor the man who wields it that brings victory. It is Allah alone." Khalid clenched his jaw. All these years, he had been tormented by the thought that his dismissal was a punishment, a sign that he had fallen out of favor. But this changed everything. Umar Hare had not doubted him. He had tested him. The room was silent as Khalid processed the truth. The resentment, the sorrow, it all suddenly felt insignificant. He looked up at Abu Darda, his eyes burning. Why? Why was this not given me sooner? Sighed. The letter was meant to be delivered after your removal, but some feared what it might do to you, how you might react. He lowered his gaze. Perhaps they underestimated you, Saifullah. Khalid exhaled, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. All this time he had thought he had been cast aside. In truth, he had been chosen for a greater lesson. Just then, the chamber doors burst open. A young soldier, breathless and wild-eyed, stood at the threshold. General, the Byzantines are moving. They march toward our lands. Khalid closed his eyes, a deep sadness settling in his chest. The warrior in him longed to rise, to lead one final charge. But now, he knew, his war had already been fought, and it had never been about him. The final night, a warrior's lament. The moon hung low over Homs, casting a silvery light across the city. In Khalid bin Walid's RA chamber, the air was thick with a sense of finality. The warrior who had once stood victorious at the head of countless armies now lay still, his body frail, his breath shallow. He had been lying on his bed for hours, unable to sleep, unable to escape the constant ache that consumed him, not just in his body, but in his soul. His mind wandered through the corridors of memory, each one lined with echoes of battles fought, comrades lost, and victories that had seemed so certain. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of holding a sword, ached to feel the weight of the blade once more. But now they trembled with the frailty of old age, sickness, and the passage of time. Beside him, his companion sat in silence, unsure how to comfort the great general who had always been a pillar of strength. Abu Darda remained at the foot of the bed, a shadow in the dim light. There was nothing left to say, only the quiet, sorrowful presence of those who had loved him. In the stillness, Khalid finally spoke, his voice a rasping whisper. I have fought in countless battles, witnessed the fall of empires, yet here I am, dying like an ordinary man. His words hung heavy in the air, a warrior's lament that could never be undone. Abu Darda moved closer, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. Khalid, you were never ordinary. You are Saifullah, the sword of Allah. Your name is forever etched in the hearts of those who fought beside you. But Khalid could not be consoled. His gaze turned inward, reflecting on a lifetime of battles fought with unrelenting faith, yet now it seemed that the battlefield had slipped beyond his reach. How cruel it felt to have spent his life seeking glory for the sake of Allah, only to meet his end in a bed, helpless and surrounded by the memories of those he had once led to victory. His eyes closed for a moment, the pain of his body and soul blending into a silent prayer. He wondered, as he had so many times before, if he had truly earned his place. Was he truly Saifullah, or had his battles been driven by a need for recognition and triumph? But in the darkness, he heard a voice, soft but clear, like a whisper from another time. It was the voice of the Prophet Muhammad, Saf, O Khalid, you are not merely a sword in the hand of Allah, you are a servant of His will. Know that your reward is not in victory, but in your submission to His command. Khalid's chest tightened as the weight of those words pressed against him. He had spent his life fighting, but now the only battle left was the one within, a battle of acceptance, of faith, of surrender. Tears, unbidden and foreign to a man who had never known defeat, welled in his eyes. His companions watched in silence, understanding that this was not the end of a warrior's life, but the end of a legend, the conclusion of a journey that had transcended the battlefield. Tell the people of Homs. Tell them I am at peace. Khalid whispered, his voice faltering. For I have fought the battles that Allah commanded me to fight. I die with no regrets, only with gratitude. As the night wore on, Khalid fell into a restless sleep, his body no longer fighting against death, but surrendering to the will of Allah. His soul, weary but at peace, found the stillness he had long sought. The sound of his breathing slowed, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm until finally it ceased. And with that, the world lost its greatest general, the sword of Allah, and yet his legacy would remain eternal. The death of the sword of Allah. The city of Homs was still, as though it too had held its breath in anticipation. The moonlight filtered through the windows of Khalid bin Walid's chamber, casting long shadows across the room where his body now lay, lifeless. The great general, Saifullah, the Sword of Allah, who had once ridden into battle with unmatched might, had finally succumbed to the quiet force of death. It was a death that seemed so unlike the grand, glorious end that many had imagined for him. A death in battle, with his sword raised high, his enemies fleeing before him. But there would be no such glory this time. Instead, Khalid's death was a whisper, a fleeting moment that passed with the quiet dignity of a warrior who had lived with purpose and fought for Allah's cause until the very end. His companions, those who had witnessed his many victories, gathered around his body. There was no crying, no wailing. Instead, a somber silence hung in the air, each man reflecting on the legacy of the man before them. Abu Darda was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. He was the sword of Allah, but Allah's will is greater than any man's strength. Tears glistened in the eyes of the warriors who had once stood at Khalid's side on the battlefield. They had known him as a commander, as a brother in arms, as a man who never showed weakness. But in his final moments, Khalid had shown them something even greater: humility. One of his closest companions, his face etched with grief, approached the body, his hands trembling as he touched Khalid's lifeless hand. This man, who has never known defeat in battle, now lies at peace. How do we continue without him? But as the companions looked down upon Khalid's body, the truth began to settle in. The warrior's journey had come to its end, but his legacy would live on forever. The Saifullah may have been laid to rest, but his sword, the metaphorical sword that had represented the strength of Islam, was now entrusted to those who would carry it forward. A deep sense of peace spread over the room as the companions began to prepare his body for burial. The mournful realization sank in, but so did a deeper understanding. Khalid had lived for Allah, and he had died for Allah. There was no greater honor. As his body was washed and wrapped in simple cloth, a quiet procession formed. The city of Homs, though filled with sorrow, now honored Khalid bin Walid, R.A., in the most profound way possible, through remembrance and respect. Word of his death spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the Islamic Empire. But while the people mourned, the Byzantines who had once feared him felt a strange sense of relief. Their great enemy, the man who had led the Muslim armies to victory time and time again, was now gone. And yet, even in death, Khalid's name was spoken with awe and fear. His legend had transcended the mortal realm. As the procession moved toward the burial site, a hush fell over the people of Homs. The sword of Allah was no more, but his impact would ripple across history, a force greater than any blade or battle. And so the death of Khalid bin Walid, R.A., was not the end of a legend. It was the beginning of a legacy that would inspire countless generations to come. A Secret Unearthed, the letter's final revelation. The funeral procession of Khalid bin Walid, R.A., was a quiet, mournful event that echoed throughout the streets of Homs. The city, once alive with the roar of battle under the command of its greatest general, now stood in reverent silence. The man who had led the Muslims to victory time and again, who had been invincible on the battlefield, was gone. Yet even in death, Khalid's influence would not fade. Days passed and the mourners had returned to their homes, but something remained unsettled. His companions, still grieving, began to sift through his belongings, memories of his life, tokens of his past, and treasures accumulated over years of service to Allah. Among these, they found something unexpected: the letter from Caliph Umar, the one that had been sealed and hidden for so long. The letter had been tucked away carefully among Khalid's most personal possessions, and it was only after his death that the sealed parchment was discovered, its significance now more powerful than ever. Abu Darda, R.A., who had witnessed Khalid's final moments, was the one to bring the letter to the people. He gathered the men who had served alongside Khalid for so long, and together they stood in the courtyard of Homs, the weight of their loss still heavy upon them. With reverence, Abu Darda R.A. unfurled the letter, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He read the words aloud. To the greatest of warriors, Khalid bin Walid, the sword of Allah, I write to you not as a ruler, but as a brother in faith. I have removed you from your command, not as a punishment, but as a test for the people. I needed them to understand that their victories, their strength, were never yours to claim, but always from Allah alone. Let no man place their trust in the sword or in the general. Their trust must be in the will of Allah, the Most High. The men listening, still processing Khalid's death, were stunned. For years, they had believed that Khalid's removal from command had been an act of mistrust, a blow to his honor. But now, the truth was laid bare. Caliph Umar had removed Khalid for a higher purpose, to remind the Ummah that no victory, no matter how grand, was ever won by the strength of a man. It was always Allah's will. The revelation was like a jolt of electricity, reverberating through the hearts of those who had once believed in Khalid's invincibility. He had never been a man seeking glory for himself, but a servant of Allah, chosen to carry out his will. His greatness lay not in his military genius, but in his unwavering faith and humility. As the letter was passed from hand to hand, each companion read the words for themselves. Some were moved to tears, others silent in deep reflection. The shock of Khalid's death had left them reeling, but this revelation was like a balm to their wounded hearts. It gave them a new understanding of their leader, a deeper respect for the man who had always been more than a general. He had been a living testament to the power of faith. Khalid had not been removed out of spite or fear. He had been removed to ensure that the Ummah would never forget that their victories were not due to any one man's efforts, but to Allah's divine will. The letter, written by Umar, was proof of his trust in Khalid, a trust that had been tested and had been proven in the most difficult of ways. The companions gathered, reflecting on this final truth, and a sense of peace began to wash over them. The sword of Allah may have been laid to rest, but the lessons he had imparted in life, of faith, humility, and submission to Allah's will, would never be forgotten. Khalid's legacy, it seemed, was greater than anyone had ever realized. The legacy of Saifullah, a death without defeat. The news of Khalid bin Walid's death spread far and wide, beyond the borders of Homs, across the Arabian Peninsula, and deep into the heartlands of Byzantium. For his companions, the loss was personal. For the Ummah, it was historic. But for the enemies of Islam, it was something else entirely. A breath of relief, tinged with fear. Even in death, his name struck dread. Byzantine generals whispered his name in their war councils. The sword of Allah has fallen, one said. But be warned, his legend may inspire more warriors than his sword ever did. In Medina, when the letter of Caliph Umar was read aloud to the people, the atmosphere shifted. Those who had once questioned the decision to strip Khalid of command now wept with regret and awe. Umar's foresight and Khalid's obedience became a symbol of leadership rooted in submission to Allah, not personal pride. The people now saw Khalid not just as a commander of men, but as a servant of Allah who had passed every test, even the hardest one, to be humiliated in the eyes of the world, yet remain content in the eyes of his Lord. And thus began the second life of Khalid bin Walid, not as a living legend, but as an immortal one. Stories of his battles were told and retold to young warriors, how he broke the Roman lines at Yarmouk, how he brought down the Persian elite at Walaja, how he led men with unshakable faith and tireless courage. But now something deeper entered those stories. The tale of a man who longed to die in battle, yet accepted a quiet death with full submission to Allah's will. That final irony, the undefeated general dying in bed, did not dim his legend. It made it eternal, because it proved something greater, that even the mightiest swords must fall, but the will of Allah never does. Years later, when new commanders took the field, they would invoke his name, fight like Khalid. Lead with faith as he did. Remember, victory is from Allah, not the sword. His grave in Homs became a place of remembrance, not just for soldiers, but for believers seeking strength. They came to honor the man who had never lost a battle and yet accepted losing his command. A man who had every reason to rage against fate, but instead bowed to it. And so the Saifullah, the sword of Allah, was never sheathed by the enemy. It was returned to its maker, unbroken, undefeated. His death did not silence his legacy, it amplified it. His life became a lesson for every believer, that greatness lies not just in victory, but in humility, and that the most powerful sword is the one that fights for Allah alone. The warhorse rests, the battlefield quiets, but the story of Khalid bin Walid echoes for all time.